Here we go. Hey guys, really excited and happy to have a guest today. A gentleman I met a little while back by the name of Brendan Duffy. And we're going to talk about the importance of sleep as it relates to athletics, as it relates to life in general, and what we really need to be brought up to speed on, because it's something that's not mentioned very often, very rarely, in terms of importance for, like I said, for athletes or anybody in general public. So how you doing, Brendan?
Doing good. Having a great day. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. One of the things that Brendan and I have in common, we're both supporters of veterans. We're both hockey guys. In fact, Brendan was really kind and sent me this puck from the Warrior Cup Challenge. I think was that in Kansas City, I believe?
I think it was Kentucky.
Or Kentucky. Yes, you're right. It was in Kentucky. And it's signed by all three Hanson brothers. So this is a really nice piece of memorabilia that we're going to auction off at my next New Jersey Warriors disabled veterans hockey function. We're going to auction this off and raise some money, and really appreciative of this. He also sent the hockey news from that covered the whole and a really cool jersey. So I appreciate that, Brendan. So maybe just give us a background, Brendan, what you're doing these days and what you've been doing.
Sure. So I'm in Long Island. I'm the director of Catholic Health's 5 sleep centers. So they keep me busy. I was working in Port Jefferson as the manager of one, but now it's all 5. It's fun. I also am on the board for American Academy of Sleep Technologists. So I'm a board member there. So I fly in and out of Chicago and look at the industry on the sleep tech side. And in addition to that, I work with Start School Later as their athletic liaison, which is a fancy term of trying to explain sleep to coaches that just want to play the games and don't interfere with the practices. And I get out and I talk to colleges and athletes and coaches about sleep and why they should utilize it as a weapon. So,
I mean, I think everybody would be honest in saying we all understand we need more sleep than we get. I know for myself, I didn't realize exactly how critical and how it affects you physically and mentally. Mm-hmm. I was surprised to find in my brief research, I think that if you get 6 or less hours of sleep, when you wake up, you're like at 0.05 if you were to take a breathalyzer with your physical and mental capacity. Yeah, consistently, if you're up 17 hours, you're basically the same as driving intoxicated, and it gets worse. DWI after 24 hours. So think of how many people get up at 6 in the morning on a Friday morning. They work all day. They go out to dinner. They have a drink at 11. They're almost there. So even without the drink, so it kind of doubles the risk, even if they're not even having a bunch of drinks, just from the fact that their perception, their reaction time is already slowed from being up that 17 hours. So you couple that with kids that are out and they're young drivers, so they don't have experience. So especially on the road, but overall, just for reaction time, and as athletes that travel a lot, it catches up with them. Yeah, we're going to get into a little deeper in the athlete thing because that's kind of my wheelhouse and what this is about. But to follow up, what is the incidence of workplace accidents and deaths due to the lack of sleep, so to speak? They have actually there are people that are actually fatigue consultants with the industries, and I don't have the numbers, but it's enough that they've convinced these companies, especially trucking, mining, transportation, that is well worth both for the human benefit and financially to bring these people on board to work with these workers so that they can reduce some of those injuries, absenteeism, sicknesses. They tend to catch colds and different things that go on. So I don't know the numbers, but I know that it's quite extensive enough to warrant a full-time position. And I would imagine, I'm sorry. And bringing consultants in from the outside. And I would imagine also, since we're very, with COVID, everyone is really concerned and aware of immunity, that lack of sleep has to compromise your immune system, correct? Oh, it definitely does. Yeah. People that are sleeping less than 5 hours versus people that are sleeping 8 hours, it might be 17% if you expose them to a cold that they would catch it versus 42% chance on the other side. So again,
this COVID has done a lot of things to sleep. Sometimes it's been good, sometimes it's been bad because people are more consistent. Kids are getting more sleep. You see that they're performing better. On the other side, it's created anxiety for other people, so it's made it tougher to sleep. And people that were already having sleep issues, insomnia, it's become yet another nut to crack because they're worried about jobs and finances and schedules are off, and they've got habits they never had before with caffeine and things like that.
So before we get into the athletics part of it, you had mentioned before about working with a program to start school later. And can you just like explain that? I kind of understand your thought, but I want to hear you really be more illustrative of what you're doing.
Sure. The science has shown that when kids reach teenage years and all the way through early 20s, which does include college and a lot of pro athletes, that they go through a shift phase. So even if they're tired, they're unable to fall asleep. They're on a delayed sleep phase. They're on a different clock. It's basically in New York that they're on California time. So even when they're tired, they find it hard to be able to sleep before 11 o'clock or so, even when they want to. They're just not wired that way. And then they have to get up because of bus schedules at a certain time, usually 6 or 7 o'clock. So we're not giving them the amount of sleep that usually they need. Everybody's different, but we're saying at that age level, they need about 9 or 10 hours sleep. So now you've cut them from getting that 9 or 10 hours sleep. If they have to get on a bus at 6 or 7 and they can't fall asleep till 11 or midnight, they're in that 5 or 6, 6 hour range. So it's almost, 60% of what they really need. The thing that people don't understand too is sleep is very active. People think it's wasted time, it's dull time, it's downtime. But one of the sleep doctors said, if this was wasted time, it's the biggest mistake that, evolution ever made.
Correct.
Because it's 8 hours worth of time that we're not safe from predators, we're not reproducing. So there has to be something that's in it. Well, one of the things they find that's in it with REM sleep, which is more so towards the end of the sleep period, is that's where your emotional and problem solving and your emotional level and everything is reset. So in the beginning, you kind of reset physically in the beginning of the night. In the morning, more so, there's a lot more of that REM. So what we're doing to the kids that are going to school is people will say, well, it's just an hour, and they're going to have to do that when they grow up. First of all, when they grow up, it's going to change again. They're going to go back to being able to fall asleep earlier. But the thing is, they go through different sleep than you do or I do as a matter of fact, but their REM sleep being truncated in that point, we may be stripping them of 50 to 75% of a certain type of sleep. And that's the type that really influences them making risky behavior decisions, or, depression is increased, drug abuse, alcohol, unsafe sex, all that kind of stuff that goes into that, because they're not sorting out all of the information they're gathering during the day, and mentally they're not set for the next day.
That's really interesting. It's incredible, actually. Yeah. And then you couple that with the poor nutrition. So, and I understand mothers it's a mad rush in the morning, but you shove a Pop-Tart down a kid's throat, which is just high processed foods, and pushing he or she out the door and send them off to school. They don't have the rest. They don't have the nutrition. And then what happens is they're ADHD, and then they get put on medication, and it's just, it's a terrible cycle. I think that really people need to really sit back and think about your considerations with the sleep and consideration of nutrition, and undereducated and over medicated is really a problem in our country with our kids.
And what drug do we allow these kids to use? Is caffeine. So then, America runs on Dunkin'. They're right. We do, but that doesn't mean we should. Or Starbucks. So you'll see all these kids, these teenagers, they're over there at Dunkin's or Starbucks trying to keep themselves awake, or energy drinks. A lot of that is caffeine too. So, it's not a good habit to get into.
No, not at all. So to that point, let's delve over to the athletics, and I want to speak to my two sports, which are boxing, both amateur and professional, and ice hockey. And I want to start with boxing. At the professional level, I've been fortunate enough that I've worked a few championship fights, or not championship, one championship fight, but main events. And they're always the last fight of the card.
Right.
And generally speaking, they don't usually go off until, somewhere between 11, usually closer to midnight. Okay, it can be any time in between there. So I've often wondered, and I'm sure you're going to be really able to give me a good understanding of how this should work, is that so if my fighter is going to fight at 11 p.m., let's say, why are we training at 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
True. True. And sometimes when the Olympians go abroad, they start training on the schedule of the Olympics. But I'll take it one point further. If I was you during those fights, I would ask, where is my opponent coming from?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because if they're coming from the West Coast, they already have an advantage because you're on their clock.
Correct. That's a good
So,
point.
so
Yeah.
Monday Night Football, whenever those West Coast teams come in, they historically have won at a greater percentage, regardless of the point spread.
Makes
I
sense.
think it's something like 68% when
Wow.
they play those Monday Night Football games, because you're laboring at 11
Yeah.
o'clock, is there 8 o'clock. So they're in their sweet spot. Now, those same teams, when they come in and they play in the daytime, there
Mhm.
is not that difference. It's strictly the circadian advantage that they get.
That's,
So, yeah, I would have asked those boxes. If you're from California, we have trouble,
that's a great point. That's something
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we never considered to even think
Yeah.
to that in that direction. I do know that there was a championship fight a while back. It was Costa Zoo, who was out of Australia. He fought Ricky Hatton, and they fought in Ricky's home country of England. And
Right.
they fought at 1 a.m. English time so that the mainland here in the U.S. would see it at whatever time. I forget what
Right,
it
right.
worked out to be. And to Ricky Hatton's credit, he was training in the gym at 1 a.m. British time
Right.
for probably 4 to 5 weeks leading up to the fight.
Mhm.
Costa Zoo, I believe he was training here in the States, probably Florida, because I know he trained out of there sometimes. Excuse
Right.
me. He only flew into England 4 days before the fight.
Mhm.
And I watched that fight, and I said to myself when they came into the ring, Costa Zoo Brendan, he could barely get through the ropes.
All right,
I
right.
said, this kid's beat already. And
Yeah.
sure enough, Hatton took the title. Now I'm trying to remember. He stopped him. I don't know if it was a knockout or not, but as soon as I saw that, I said, "There's no way this kid can fight."
Right.
And again, to Hatton's credit, they were training at the time of the fight where they were going to at the venue site.
And that's what a lot of the Olympics will start. That they'll either try to get their way ahead, or they'll start in their hometown, coming in late in the evening because they know that's what they're up against. So it's really interesting when you start to get into the circadian rhythms and time changes. But the general rule of thumb is, for every time zone we cross, it takes us 1 day to recover. And it's easier for us to go west than it is to come east, because going west, you're just staying up later. But it's harder to go to sleep when it's light out. So the sleep experts really work a lot with a lot of these teams and these athletes to say, let's set up a regimen of, maybe we'll have you take melatonin at a certain time, and then we want to expose you to bright lights at a certain time. So if we want to get the jet lag to be reduced, then we want you to hit yourself with lights at certain times that will mimic where you're going. And I got a call. One of the colleges locally is going to be going out to the West Coast, and said, well, how do we prepare? And I said, well, the good thing for you is they're college athletes, so you're halfway there, because they fall asleep on West Coast time. So the only thing you have to do is stop early morning practices and let them sleep in till 10 or 11, and tell them, we don't want to see you here too early. And then you'll be adjusted almost before you get there, because you're basically on California time. And because of that circadian delay that I mentioned, they're constantly going to bed at a time that mimics the West Coast. Trouble is, they're getting up at East Coast time, but going to bed at a West Coast time.
So that's really interesting because I'm professional ice hockey. So when I was with New York, we had I think an 11-day trip where we started right after the holiday, Christmas. We flew out New York and went. And first game was in San Jose, and then we played LA. Then we flew to Phoenix, played them. Then we flew to Edmonton, played them. Back to Colorado to play the Avalanche. Excuse me, and then flew to Pittsburgh to play the Penguins. And this was in an 11-day time period. Right. So I think it was 4 different time zones. Excuse me. So listening to what you're saying, I'm wondering if professional teams, so New York, we fly out to San Jose. We get in the day before the game. We should probably just skip the morning skate entirely and just let the guys sleep till like 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, and they should actually prepare if they can, even before they get on the plane. A day or two, you should try to do that at home. But definitely, when you get there, you have options. Either you try and stay on your time through the whole trip, which is crazy, and some teams try and do that. When they're coming from the west to east, and they try and stay because they know it's good for them. But going forward, that's a lot of games and a lot of days, and they have studies that show those back to back to back, they don't give enough time for recovery. So Pat Byrne, who I mentioned, worked with the Vancouver Canucks, was instrumental. That here's a team, Vancouver. Yeah.
This is his book. I'm trying to frame it here. It's called Inconvenient Sleep, and it's written by the gentleman that Brennan's speaking about. And Brennan was kind enough to send this to me. And he's the Vancouver Canucks sleep coach, so to speak, right?
Yeah, he was. He was the first. They called him because they said, no matter what we do with the amount of travel we have, we'll never have a chance to win a cup unless we take hold of this situation. Mm-hmm. And they travel, I think, something like 55,000 miles in a season versus a Rangers or a Flyers who are doing about 25, 30. Mm-hmm. So they're doing double the travel. So he brought Pat in, and Pat looked at just what you're saying, all of the schedules. And they could tell looking at the schedules, he picked out a game and he said, this one right here is going to be a tough one. Yeah. And it had nothing to do. Pat didn't follow hockey just to the talent of the teams. And sure enough, they went in and they looked like they were playing drunk. And that's, I've heard the same thing with the Boston Celtics when the doctor there looked at that and actually said, it's going to be as if they're playing drunk that game. The coach got thrown out. They asked the team, the commentators were talking to themselves, what are they doing wrong? And he said nothing except offense, defense, and coaching. The whole game was a shambles. And it did look like what's gone wrong with them. But if you look at their schedule, they could tell that they just have no recovery time. So they're playing on fumes. So a lot of times we're looking at athletes, whether it's high school, college, or professional. And basically what we're seeing is which sleep-deprived elite athletes could play the best. So
to that point, and we've had like a 3-way conversation with Tom Laidlaw about this, and Tom's agreeing with you and understanding the science. He also, on the flip side, is thinking, well, maybe some players will use it as an excuse for a poor performance.
Right.
Do you think that's a valid point, or it's really across the board, everybody is going to be affected equally in terms of lack of sleep?
I don't know if it's equally because everybody has their own, talent that will show through. There are some people that they don't get any sleep and they'll get called up to the majors and just on adrenaline, they'll be able to power through and have great outings. So yeah, that happens. But as the season goes, they get worn down. Just one indication is Major League Baseball. You would think if you're doing something and over, that you would get better at it. But what they've seen in Major League Baseball is when they look at these batters and the pitches they swing at, as the season goes longer, their batting eye gets worse and they swing at worse pitches.
Really?
Because they're fatigued and their judgment starts to get off. So, you're thinking with what happens in the end of the season, the worst pitches come up, right? Mm-hmm. And you would think they'd have an easier time, but it's just the opposite. And also, we have something here that's like 5 questions. It's called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. Mm-hmm. And we give it to patients here, but you can find it online. It asks you 5 questions. The people that are in the Major League Baseball that filled that out when they did a test, the ones that were considered sleepy were gone from the major leagues within 5 years at a 50% ratio versus the ones that filled it out that didn't have a sleep issue was something like 17, 18%. So it was just by asking them 5 questions, and they could weed them out. So it's kind of nuts. I was just reading before I got on when you see all these minor league teams that these players are having a hard time and they're sleeping in living rooms and all this, everything that goes on. And I remember when my son played baseball, all the scouts for Stevie Matz from the Mets was there. He played on the same team. So, and Marcus Stroman was in it. He had a lot of good crop when he was growing up. And they'd all be there with the guns and they'd do all this research. And nobody ever wondered, does this kid stay up all night playing video games? But now in the NHL, one of the main prospects was kind of taken off the list because they couldn't get him to go to sleep at night and get off his addiction. And it's a performance issue, just like going out and drinking all night. This is the new.
He was up all night playing games.
Yeah. And to the point where they had to cross him off the list that they couldn't take a chance.
That's incredible. And so what we're saying then is that because of sleep deprivation, there's many athletes that are leaving a lot of money on the table, and their careers are ending prematurely.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They're not addressing the issue of sleep.
They're not, and even if they do make it, they may be getting injured more because a lot of the medical doctors, they don't really know sleep, and that's a problem because in medical school, medical doctors, even up to this day, spend less than 2 hours talking about sleep.
And nutrition as well. So it's a double whammy.
So and nutrition and sleep too, like caffeine and how it impacts sleep.
Which makes me wonder, I mean, let's talk about the National Hockey League in particular, because it's kind of our groundwork here. There's so much technology now in the National Hockey League, especially with Corsi and all the statistical references and tracking this, that, and the other thing. Have they really addressed the sleep issue, you think?
I think they're doing the best they can, but these are athletes. A lot of them are young guys. So I remember when Pat first started, and they wanted them to wear the bands where they went actigraphy, where they could kind of measure. And one of the players on the Vancouver Canucks said, we were in Calgary and we wanted to go out. We were on the road from Vancouver. Okay. So we asked the goalie if he'd put all 5 on his wrist and we'd go out. So you try your best. But what happens is once they get involved in it and they see the difference, then they're sold. And if you get somebody like Ovechkin, who was notorious for going out all the time, as he got older, he couldn't do that quick turnaround. So he got really invested in sleep. And that's when they won their Stanley Cup right after that. So by him being a role model on that team, I think his habits either, some people, they're leaders, they stray the team, or they bring the team towards the right information.
Yeah, I won't mention any names, but I've known a lot of players over the year who are really talented, had really nice, very successful careers. Yet you do also, in the back of your mind, wonder, given what they accomplished, what more could they have accomplished?
Exactly.
Led a better lifestyle. But, it's very difficult when you're a young man and you have some notoriety and you have some money in your pocket.
Right.
It's tough.
And it's something that's never been taught. They don't get the sleep education in high school. Goalie Robin Leonard, was crying for help, drinking a case of beer while he was playing with the Buffalo Sabres. And he said this, and it was kind of like, well, could you wait till after the season? So it was like, no, he couldn't. And they got him help. But if they start questioning more about their sleep habits, a lot of what they're going through, if it's emotional or alcohol, because sometimes they don't get educated, so they don't realize that the alcohol will fragment their sleep. They think it will help them fall asleep.
It aggravates the nervous system, correct?
Yeah, and it causes their sleep to be fragmented, and it's just not a good thing. It might help you fall asleep, but the second half of the night is not a good sight. Ambien, same thing. If these even Olympians like Michael Phelps, went on the road, said he got really no education. He had depression. They're giving him sleep meds because why? Because they were traveling. And that's not how you really prescribe medication. It's let's work with him because we've got natural remedies that are better than sleeping aids, such as cognitive behavior therapy, which usually within 6 or 8 sessions is very effective.
So one of the difficulties that we're talking about Ambien in particular is that let's say, what's today? Tuesday. We have a game in New York tonight, right? And by the time guys get out of the locker room, it's after midnight, thereabouts, and you're all revved up. You just play, you just play a hockey game. You can't go to sleep. And someone will go for dinner, then they get back to their apartment, and they're wide awake at 4 a.m.
All right.
And maybe we have practice at the practice rink in Westchester, and they have to be there by, say, 9 or 9:30 to get on the ice at 11. So how many hours of sleep are they getting? Very few.
They are. They are, and they have to supplement with naps if they can. And I know in the NBA they're big on the naps, but if you've got an opportunity, it will really, help with alertness and your ability to go forward on limited sleep. So if you've got a big block of time, you could try for 90 minutes where you go through a full cycle of sleep.
Mhm.
We talked about a little bit of REM being mental at the beginning of the night, and if they miss that, they miss that, which is very strange. But the way sleep works is at the beginning of the night, it really works on growth hormone and testosterone.
Right.
So from that 11 to 1 or 2 period, that's where most of that's going to happen. That's your deep sleep, right? Your best sleep, where it's hard to wake the people up. Once you start getting later in, it's more of a lower level sleep or REM, where basically if you look at somebody's REM brain waves, they're the same as if they're awake. You couldn't tell different.
Mm.
But that deep sleep, if they miss it, that's the restoration and the muscle toning and all that good stuff that goes on from all that time in the gym, testosterone,
Growth hormone release.
yeah, all of that is at the beginning. So if you miss it, like when you're on that road trip and they keep missing things like that, I think that's why people get hurt on those trips when they have those back-to-back, because they don't have that time for that little muscle tear to not become even worse, because you've got no repair time, you've got no recovery time. So
So let's look at a typical NHL day. And this, then I want to talk about amateur hockey with children in particular,
sure, yeah.
high school and college. But in the NHL, so it's a game day. You get to the rink around whatever 9:30 a.m. Again, you get on the ice for a morning skate. After the morning skate, there's a team meal, and then you go to your room in the hotel and you take a nap.
Right.
Then you return to the rink somewhere. I don't know, if game's at 7, maybe at somewhere between 4:30 and 5. How long should that nap be? Is it if you go too long, is there a point of diminishing returns, or is there a minimum 20-minute nap, 30-minute nap just to get that restoration?
How much time do you have? If you have time during the day and
Yeah,
you really need, because of travel, to pick it up, you could do 90 minutes. You want to go through a full
90 minutes?
cycles, yeah, full cycle of normal sleep, and we don't even know if these people have sleep disorders and not even touching on it, but full period of sleep somewhere in that 90-minute range. If you have that time, that's great. That will be great. But if you don't, then you're looking at 20, 30 minutes, and you probably want to set an alarm 10 minutes more, because chances are it's going to tell you it's going to take you 10 minutes to fall asleep anyhow. So it depends on, and you want to kind of keep it between 2 and 4 o'clock, because those are our natural siesta, where your circadian rhythm is down. So the best time for those naps is between 2 and 4.
4. And that's about when the NHL player would take the nap.
Right.
Somewhere in that time. So I guess they may have done a little research and looked into it, or it was just by luck that it worked out that way.
No, they are. They are. Even the Yankees, if you go to spring training years ago, they used to have all these young players out on the field by 9 o'clock in the morning. They started talking to all the sleep scientists, and you won't find them there before 11 o'clock now when they start their spring training. And that puts them right in the heat. So it used to be, let's try to get our work in early. But then when they looked at the information they were getting, they're like, that's not a good way to do it. Let's start at 11, deal with the heat. So it's been fun. Even the Islanders, I'm a Ranger fan. So when the Islanders were out here, they actually had started to play in Brooklyn. So all these young kids had houses out here, and they're all young kids on the Islanders, right? So what they had them doing was getting on the train like Joe Commuter with your Islander jerseys and traveling into Brooklyn. They would have the skate that you mentioned. Then they would stick around. They'd go to the hotel, take their nap, come back, play the game, get out of there 12, and then have to come back here. So finally, I was looking at that and said, looking at the age of this team, they're all young kids. They're probably still, many of them in that delayed sleep phase. This is going to burn them out. They realized that, and as a team, they went to the coach and the managers and talked to them and said, can we do something different? So they decided, let them sleep in, do the early skate at their old rink out here, and then bust them in.
That's really makes a heck of a lot of sense.
I went back and I looked at their records because I said, I bet you they're going to be better, which again, the second half of the season, they're more tired, right? So they were 64% winning percentage versus 68%. When I took the points that would have been, they would have been from 4th place to a 2nd place team just by making that change. So these little tweaks, when you think of how much they spend on just getting that little bit of edge, this is like a performance enhancer that costs nothing. It's readily available. They do all the work and have the discipline in the gym, but very few have the discipline when they're not. It's like the hardest training they could do.
Well, which part of some of the things I do other than hockey and boxing is I'm teaching a lot of skill,
right?
Martial arts or boxing, whatever. So skill acquisition, I've researched a ton on the myelination process and just how many repetitions and frequency of training a new skill and the duration of training for. So now you've got me thinking, obviously, that the sleep is a huge part of skill acquisition.
Right.
Correct. So
Right.
To that point, when we look at amateur hockey, child goes to school, gets out of school maybe at 3, has a snack as the general rule of thumb, gets to the rink for practice at let's say it's a 7 p.m. practice, and practices and has a bite to eat and then goes to sleep. But when they hit that 7 o'clock, they've been in school, like to your point, they've probably been up since 6. Is their skill acquisition diminished tremendously or impacted by the fact that it's that late in the day and mentally and physically they're already at a loss or at a deficit?
I think it is. What they've done research in is that those kind of muscle memory tasks, coupled with a good night's sleep, is what really cements it, because it goes from a temporary file into a permanent file.
Yeah.
Now, again, a lot of that happens in that early morning, so they don't have that because of school. So maybe you'd find that your skill is better in the summer where they have more time, to sleep in.
Here's a question I have for you. Talking about the early morning. I've known, and I've done it myself. I used to give private lessons at like anywhere from 5:30 to 6 a.m. We'd start, have a kid or a couple kids on the ice for probably an hour. They shower, go off to school. So are you telling me that's, and I'm thinking I'm reading this right, that's a better time for them to learn skill acquisition?
Better if they're sleeping at that time, not to have like the swimmers are doing that. So it's better that whatever you're training, they get a good night's sleep and that they actually get up on a natural time rather than school time. Because again, you don't want to lose that certain type of reasoning, mental processing, everything that goes on. So I'm wondering if you're more successful in the summer. You see how these kids always have this growth spurt?
Yeah.
It's in the summer, right? Because they're able to sleep. It happens in the summer. They come back to school. It's like, it's been 2 months. How did that happen, right? This guy would. So the same thing with everything else that's going on mentally or physically. If we give enough time for these processes, what drives me crazy is sometimes I'll see hospitals and places that do sports medicine do concussion testing, and I'll see kids dragging in on a Friday, and they do a baseline test so that if they have a concussion, they'll be able to go back to the baseline. I was like, well, you already have a baseline of a concussed kid, because by the time Fridays come, he's lost a full night's sleep. Right. And actually, they've done, I think, West Point cadets and athletes where they gave them a concussion test. And these people were so sleep deprived that they scored the same as the athletes that had concussions. And these people never had a concussion. So I had to say, let me look at that. When we looked at sleep, the people that were sleep deprived were, much more, I forget what the percentage was, apt to have concussions, and it's reaction time. They're not able to process. So I have something I use in my PowerPoints. So remember the game LeBron played with J.R. Smith, and J.R. just had to throw the ball back.
Oh, yeah.
And he held it. Now, LeBron's a big sleeper. LeBron will sleep for up to 12 hours when you include his naps. J.R. was a big caffeine freak that he'd stay up and work on caffeine. But once the caffeine crashed, you never know when. And I think it crashed when that ball came down, and he just didn't know what to do because he was washed out, right?
Yeah.
So I use that, and I was like, LeBron look at him and say, that's sleep versus non-sleep. You could fool the system for a while, but just like holding your breath. I mean, there's no way you can continue to hold your breath if I ask you to.
Yeah.
You can say, I can go without sleep, or I can minimize it. Sooner or later, it's going to catch up with you.
It's fascinating. And again, I really appreciate your time, Brendan, because this is a topic. There's two things that I think are critically important that people come to terms with. And one is the whole importance of sleep, and the other one's hydration.
Right.
Most people are in a dehydrated state. They walk around, they don't know it, but they're totally dehydrated. You couple that with poor nutrition, lack of sleep, and look at we don't have a health care crisis in this country. We have a health crisis.
Yes.
We got plenty of health care. We have a health crisis, but that's another topic for another day.
And all the people that are dealing with weight, programs, but they don't pay attention to sleep. I think every weight facility should have a sleep coach for these people.
Sure, because if you don't get proper sleep, you're gaining weight.
Yeah, you're not going to do it. Your metabolic rate is not going to be as effective as it can be. And basically, there's two hormones, leptin and ghrelin, that go in opposite directions. So I was like, how do you treat just the nutrition and the weight without dealing with the sleep part, because it's not effective?
And just so people know, leptin is the satiating hormone, and ghrelin is the one that makes you hungry, correct?
Right. And they go in totally opposite directions based on, not having enough sleep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Brendan, I really appreciate your time. This was fascinating. I'd love to have you on again. If people have questions or want to reach out to you, how could they go about doing that?
Sure. Brendan Duffy 55@gmail.com is an email. I'm happy to answer any questions. And then if they go on LinkedIn and they just put in my name and sleep, there's a lot of coaches and trainers and just individuals that are interested. I'm happy to have them connect. I post a lot of information out there.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute incredible importance to all of my friends out there that coach either hockey or boxing or football, whatever it is, to utilize and understand what Brendan's talking about. Reach out to him if you have a question, because it can really make a huge difference. And then just for everybody, all my friends and family and myself included, I'm trying, Brendan. I'm really trying to get better with my sleep.
Dream big.
Yeah, the problem, for me is my shoulders are really, really in a bad state of repair. Yeah, so I wake up quite often from pain, and I don't want to utilize anything for pain management. I'm not at that point, nowhere near.
Well, I'll tell you what you can use, and it's natural. It's tart cherry juice. That's what a lot of the Olympic players do, because melatonin has got anti-inflammatory properties. And actually, people don't know melatonin was used during COVID because it also has anti-inflammatory properties. But I wouldn't go with script melatonin. I would stick with the tart cherry juice, because you don't really know what. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Brendan.
All right.
Again at your convenience, when you have some time. I'd love to have you back on. We could talk about this for hours, and really appreciate your time.
All right, thank you. Have a great evening.
You too, Brendan. Go Rangers.
Yep.
Hey, let's hope we don't lose. I think today is the Kraken expansion draft.
I think tomorrow, Wednesday.
Or I'm sorry, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Is it at 3 or something? And then
I think so.
And then the trading deadline ends at 5 tomorrow. Is that how it works, or the other way?
I hope so. Somebody told me it's late, and I can't stay up. It's a bad look if the sleep director comes in sleepy.
Yeah. You got it, Brendan. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.